Hi, I am Umar Sheikh and welcome back to the YouTube channel of Australia Immigration Matters. In today's video, I am going to talk about the importance of skills assessment and how to get it right the first time. As we know that the skills assessment is one of the most important prerequisites of submitting an expression of interest along with English language proficiency test. There are more than 40 assessing authorities which assess hundreds of occupations listed in the skilled occupations lists provided by Department of Home Affairs. In this video, I am going to share with you the top tips and tricks to get positive skills assessment. So let's get started. I will walk you through each of the tip in detail one by one. So let's move to the tip number one. The tip number one is to choose the right occupation. Choosing the right occupation for a skills assessment can be the most crucial step in this process. Your skills will be assessed against Australian standards for the occupation you nominate, which measure these key points. Number one, your qualification level. Number two, your work experience. Now, your work experience includes the time you have spent working in your nominated role and how your qualifications and employment experience interact with each other or collectively meet criteria for the nominated occupation. Let's move to the tip number two. Tip number two is to know your job category and how you fit into it. This isn't as obvious as it might seem. Be aware that your qualifications and how you perform the job may differ how Australian industries operate, even though it's the standard in your home country. Employment roles are assessed against the NSCO codes, which lists the benchmark qualifications, benchmark employment, and the expected skill level required for each occupation. Don't underestimate the requirements of your occupation category. For example, for professional occupations, it's not enough to only have practical experience or to have worked in a senior role in an occupation if you don't hold the required qualification level specified in the criteria. Let's move to the tip number three. Explore alternate pathways. Don't despair if you don't meet the exact criteria for one occupation. You may have other options. For example, VETSS assess more than 360 occupations. Although you may hold the position of a scientist in your current role, you might not meet the qualification level criteria that Australia requires for a scientist. However, you may be able to apply as a skilled migrant in another category, such as at the technician level. It's important to understand that you have to know your exact skill level and exact occupation level while applying for the skills assessment. You can explore alternate pathways as per your assessing body's list. Let's move to the tip number four. Ensure relevance of major field of study in occupations. In many categories of occupation, your major field of study must not only relate to your occupation but be assessed as highly relevant. As an example, the role of dental hygienist requires highly relevant qualifications in the area of dental hygiene therapy, or oral health therapy. Studies and employment in dentistry or dental surgery cannot be assessed positively for this occupation because they are not considered highly relevant to current Australian industry standard practices. This is important to note that you have to ensure relevance of your major field of study in the occupation which you are nominating for your application. Let's move to the tip number five. Ensure alignment of your primary employment. Be certain about your primary employment role. This must relate primarily to your nominated occupation for skills assessment purposes. You might perform several roles in your organization, but you need to have worked in the role of your nominated occupation while applying for the skills assessment and performed tasks at the required skill level of that occupation as it is outlined in the NSCO guidelines. You have to ensure that your primary employment is aligned to the nominated occupation for a positive skills assessment. Let's move to the next step, which is tip number six, which is to align relevancy of your experience history or your experience profile. Ensure your employment experience is highly relevant to your nominated occupation. Applicants can make the mistake of assuming that because they have worked in a particular job in that industry, they could easily perform another role in that industry, but it might not be true. You possibly could do the job, but for skills assessment purpose, you need to demonstrate that you have actually performed the job and at the required skill level. You have to align relevancy of your experience history to the nominated occupation to get positive skills assessment. Let's move to the tip number seven. Ensure to prove your level of seniority. Assessing authority will look for evidence of your position within the organizations where you have worked. Now, this is requirement by certain assessing authorities for certain occupations, not for all the occupations, but this is important for the people who are applying as managerial roles or for the ones where the organizational chart is one of the requirements. You need to ask yourself, can you demonstrate your scope of responsibility and level of authority in the work you have performed? Where do you sit within the organizational structure, and is this shown on an organizational chart you can provide? For the assessment of managerial occupations and some additional ones, they require an organizational chart as well, along with reference letter, along with payment evidences. The types of proof they require may also include evidence of projects you have been involved in. Now, again, this is the requirement for some of the occupation skills assessments, such as program and project administrator. You have to provide the list of projects you have worked on. So this was tip number 7 to get positive skills assessment for certain cases. Let's move to the tip number 8, which is the most important one. Understand the combination of qualification and employment. This is where applicants can go wrong by applying when they only meet some of the criteria. Now, to understand what it means, let's take up the case of wet assessed skills assessment criteria. For example, in some of the occupations, you can apply with a relevant bachelor degree plus at least 1 year of relevant full-time employment in the last 5 years. You will get positive skills assessment. If you have an irrelevant bachelor degree plus, but you have relevant additional qualifications such as diploma, and you have at least 2 years of relevant full-time employment in the last 5 years, again you will get the positive skills assessment for your nominated occupation. And in third case, if you have an irrelevant bachelor degree and no additional relevant qualification, then you have to prove your nominated occupation with at least 3 years of relevant full-time employment in the last 5 years. These assessments consider your post-qualification work experience. But you can also apply with pre-qualification employment in certain cases if you have at least 5 years of pre-qualification work experience years overall, plus 1 year of relevant employment experience in the last 5 years. This is possible, and these are the guidelines of wet assess. Whereas, as we know that ACS has its own assessment criteria, they require at least 2 years of post-qualification work experience for a positive skills assessment for ICT occupations. Similarly, there are some other assessing authorities which do not require mandatory post-qualification work experience to give you positive skills assessment. Some of the assessing authorities, such as Engineers Australia or even AITSL for school teachers, they can assess your experience, they can assess your qualifications for your positive skills assessment. So every assessing authority has its own criteria, but to understand that how you have to combine your qualification and employment to go for your skills assessment to have positive result. Let's move to the last tip, which is tip number 9. This is for the people who are applying on the basis of self-employment. So you have to provide the required evidence of self-employment. If you are self-employed in a professional occupation, you will have to provide evidence of this such documentation from your accountant or lawyer confirming business registration details and the type of business and the dates stating the times of your self-employment, or official business or sole trading registration documentation. It's all about the business registration details, which should be an authorized document from an independent accountant or lawyer, which you need to provide, which also shows the period of employment for your self-employment case. You will also need to provide a statutory declaration listing your main job duties during self-employment. Other evidences which can include bank statements showing you have received regular income from your self-employment with corresponding client invoices, taxation evidence, contracts, client testimonials, and evidence of projects. Now, this tip is for the applicants who are applying on the basis of self-employment. So to conclude, as you can see, it's important to understand how the assessment system operates, how the assessing bodies operate, how your qualifications and work experience are assessed in combination, and the importance of the words highly relevant. This is most important thing. The way the assessing authorities operate, you need to understand that psyche, that they are looking for highly relevant work experience and highly relevant qualification for the best in class results. With that note, I would like to thank you everyone on behalf of Australian Immigration Matters, and keep supporting us by following our social media platforms, and stay tuned for more updates. Thank you.